The massive council chamber stretched out like a small city. Thousands of alien beings filled the floating platforms that surrounded the central speaking area. Some looked like giant insects with shining shells. Others were made of living crystal that sparkled in the light. A few were so strange that human eyes could barely understand what they were looking at. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood alone in the defendant's circle. The white light from above made her feel exposed and small. Around her, representatives from 847 different alien species prepared to vote on humanity's fate. After 3 months of trials, arguments, and evidence, it all came down to this moment. The charges against humanity were serious. The Galactic Council said humans had broken the preservation protocols. These were the most important laws in the galaxy. Every intelligent species had to follow them. The rules controlled how fast species could grow, how many planets they could live on, and how many children they could have. But humans had ignored these rules. They built cities on planets without asking permission. They changed the air and water on worlds to make them suitable for human life. Worst of all, they refused to limit how many humans could be born. The Council saw this as dangerous and selfish behavior. Chen watched the voting display in the center of the chamber. Each species had one vote. As the names appeared on the screen, most showed the same result: Exile. The Zephyrians voted first. Their leader, a tall being with silver skin and no visible mouth, pressed a button that glowed red. Exile, the crystalline Vorthak, came next. Their representative was a living mountain of purple crystal that sang when it moved. The musical tones meant exile. One by one, the votes continued. Species that humans had helped in the past voted against them. Aliens that had traded with Earth for decades chose exile. Even races that humans had saved from pirates and disasters turned their backs on humanity. Chen felt her heart sink as the numbers climbed. 700 votes for exile, 710, 720. A few species voted to let humans stay, but they were far outnumbered. In the viewing area above, she could see other human diplomats watching. Their faces showed the same shock and disappointment she felt. Behind them, news reporters from dozens of species recorded everything. This trial would be remembered across the galaxy. Council Prime Thektar stood up when the voting ended. He was huge, even for his insect-like species. His forearms moved in complex patterns as he spoke. His voice was translated into human language by the chamber's computers. "The vote is complete," Thektar announced. 739 species vote for exile. 97 vote against exile. 11 choose not to vote. The chamber filled with sounds of approval. Clicks, whistles, harmonic songs, and flashing lights showed that most aliens were happy with the result. Chen closed her eyes for a moment. Humanity had lost. By the power given to this council by the ancient laws, Thektar continued, humanity is banned from all council space. You have 50 standard days to remove all humans from beyond your home star system. Any human ship found in council space after that time will be destroyed without warning. The words hit Chen like physical blows. 50 days to evacuate 12 billion humans from 200 worlds. It seemed impossible. But she kept her face calm as alien guards moved toward her. As she was led from the chamber, Chen caught sight of Ambassador Kelrath from the hegemony. His reptilian face was hard to read, but his large eyes seemed sad. The hegemony had been one of the few species to vote against exile. Kelrath had argued that humanity's rapid growth was not evil, just different. But his voice had been lost among the others calling for humanity's removal. The walk through the council station felt long. Other beings stepped aside as Chen and her guards passed. Some watched with curiosity. Others looked pleased that the human problem was finally solved. A few seemed uncomfortable, as if they wondered if the council had made the right choice. In the human embassy section, Chen's team was already packing. Documents, computers, and personal items disappeared into shipping containers. The embassy staff worked with quiet efficiency, but she could see the fear in their eyes. How do you move 12 billion people in 50 days? Ambassador, called Director Martinez from across the room. We need to talk. Chen followed him into a private office. The walls showed images of Earth, blue oceans, white clouds, green forests. It seemed like a dream now. The evacuation plans are ready, Martinez said. We've been preparing for this possibility for months. Every human colony has emergency protocols. Ships are already moving toward the outer systems. 50 days isn't enough time, Chen said. It will have to be. Martinez pulled up a holographic display showing ship movements across human space. The civilian transport ships are starting evacuations immediately. Military vessels will protect them and carry heavy equipment. We'll strip everything useful from the colonies and bring it home. Chen studied the display. Thousands of ships moved in carefully planned patterns. It looked like a massive dance choreographed by computers. The Council expects us to leave everything behind and run like refugees. Let them think that, Martinez said with a strange smile. They have no idea what humans can do when we're truly motivated. Over the next few days, Chen watched the news reports from across human space. The evacuation was happening faster than anyone thought possible. Ships appeared at every human world at exactly the same time. Colonies that had taken decades to build were being dismantled in weeks. But something strange was happening. The humans weren't just leaving. They were taking everything. Not just people and machines, but soil, plants, even the air from terraformed worlds. Alien observers reported that human colonies didn't look abandoned after the evacuation. They looked like they had never existed at all. Dr. Zenthara, a scientist from the collective, sent worried messages to the Council. She was studying the evacuation from a human world called Kepler 442b. The energy readings don't make sense, she reported. They're reversing decades of terraforming in days. The mathematics say this should be impossible, but the Council wasn't listening to warnings. They were too busy celebrating their victory. Humanity was leaving, and that was all that mattered. The galaxy would be peaceful again. Chen spent her last days on the Council station watching the final ships leave human space. Each report showed the same thing: complete evacuation with no trace left behind. It was as if humanity had decided that if they couldn't keep their colonies, no one else could have them either. On the final day, Chen stood in the embassy one last time. The rooms were empty now, but she could still feel the weight of what had happened here. Humanity had been judged and found guilty of growing too fast, wanting too much and refusing to accept limits. As her ship prepared to leave, Chen received a message from Ambassador Kelrath. "I fear the Council has made a terrible mistake," it said. "Your species is more dangerous when cornered than when free. I hope I am wrong." Chen deleted the message and boarded her ship. As they flew away from the Council station, she looked back at the massive structure floating in space. It looked so permanent, so powerful. The beings inside thought they ruled the galaxy, but humans had learned something important during this trial. The galaxy was run by species that had accepted limits. They followed rules made by others. They believed that some things were impossible. Humanity had never been good at accepting impossible. As Chen's ship entered the jump point that would take her home to Earth, she smiled for the first time in months. The Council thought they had won. They thought humanity would quietly disappear and never cause problems again. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. The evacuation of human space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Council observers had expected chaos, panic, maybe even violence as 12 billion humans were forced to abandon their homes. Instead, they witnessed something that made many alien species deeply uncomfortable: perfect organization. Captain Vex of the Council monitoring Ship Bright. Wing watched through her ship's sensors as the evacuation unfolded. Her 3 eyes tracked multiple displays, showing human activity across dozens of star systems. "It's like they planned this years ago," she told her crew. "Every ship knows exactly where to go and what to do." The first ships to arrive at human colonies were massive cargo vessels, bigger than most alien cities. They moved into orbit around each world and immediately began what looked like industrial mining operations. But instead of digging for metals or crystals, they were taking apart entire cities. On New Geneva, a farming world that had fed millions of humans, the process was eerily efficient. Buildings came apart piece by piece, with each component sorted and loaded onto transport ships. The atmospheric processors that had made the air breathable were carefully removed and packed away. Even the soil, rich earth that had taken decades to create, was being loaded into special containers. Commander Yix of the reptilian hegemony watched from his observation post on the edge of the system. His report to Council headquarters was full of confusion. "They're not just evacuating," he wrote. "They're taking everything. I mean everything. The orbital stations, the floating cities, even the modified algae in the oceans. What bothered the observers most was the speed. Human engineering had always been impressive, but this was beyond impressive. It was impossible. The energy requirements alone should have taken centuries to accomplish. Yet world after world was being completely stripped in a matter of days. Dr. Zenthara, the collective scientist monitoring Kepler 442b, sent increasingly frantic reports to the Council. From her research station on the edge of the system, she watched human ships do things that violated basic physics. "The atmospheric extraction is happening too fast," she transmitted. "They've somehow removed the entire artificial atmosphere from the planet in 6 hours. The energy needed to do that should have melted the planet's surface, but the temperature readings are normal." Her next report was even more disturbing. "They're not just taking the atmosphere. They're taking the changes they made to the planet itself. The soil composition is reverting to pre-terraforming levels. This should be impossible. The molecular changes were permanent." But the Council wasn't interested in Dr. Zenthara's warnings. They were too busy celebrating. The human problem was solving itself. Let the humans perform whatever impossible tricks they wanted as long as they left Council space. What the Council failed to notice was that several deep space monitoring stations had gone silent. These unmanned stations watched for pirates and hostile ships in the empty regions between star systems. One by one, their signal simply stopped. No distress calls, no explosions, no signs of attack. They just went quiet. The evacuation continued with mechanical precision. Human colony ships, which had taken months to reach their destinations during the original expansion, now made the journey home in days. The ships moved faster than Council sensors could track, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. On the agricultural world of Harmony, alien traders who had worked with human farmers for decades watched in amazement as entire forests were somehow rolled up like carpets and loaded onto ships. The trees, the soil, even the insects and small animals. Everything that made the world alive went with the humans. "It's like they're taking the soul of the planet," one trader reported to his government. "What's left behind isn't just empty. It's dead." The same pattern repeated across human space. Worlds that had been green and full of life became gray and lifeless. Not destroyed. That would have been understandable. Instead, they were somehow emptied of everything that had made them special. The Symph, whose musical communications could travel vast distances through quantum effects, began reporting strange sounds from the direction of human space. Their songs, which normally carried news and gossip across the galaxy, were being interrupted by harmonics that made no sense. "The frequencies are wrong," reported song leader Melith to the Council. "They sound like reality being stretched." But that's impossible. Even more unsettling were reports from the Watchers. These ancient artificial intelligences had monitored space for millions of years. They had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Nothing surprised them anymore, but something in human space was making them nervous. "We request an emergency session with the Council," the Watchers transmitted. "We are detecting anomalous readings from the Sol system. The nature of these readings cannot be discussed over public channels." The Council ignored their request. The Watchers were old and paranoid. They saw threats everywhere. This was probably just another false alarm. As the 50th day approached, the last human ships crossed the boundary of Council space. The evacuation was complete. Not a single human remained outside the Sol system. The galaxy was peaceful again, but the peace felt wrong to many observers. Captain Vex found herself unable to sleep during her species' rest cycles. She kept remembering the final images from the human worlds. Empty planets spinning in space like bones picked clean by invisible scavengers. More disturbing were the reports about pirates. For the first time in recorded galactic history, pirate attacks had completely stopped. Not reduced, not moved to different areas, unless stopped entirely. The rough beings who had terrorized shipping lanes for centuries had simply vanished. Council security forces investigated several known pirate bases. They found them empty, with no signs of struggle or hasty departure. The crews were gone as if they had never existed. The only clue was strange scorch marks on the metal walls that looked almost like writing, but in no language any alien could read. Ambassador Kelrath of the Hegemony stood in his office looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was locked away in their home system. The galaxy's most aggressive and unpredictable species had been contained. Everyone should have been celebrating. So why did he feel like they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history? His aide, a young female named Seth, brought him the daily reports. "The trade routes are running smoothly," she said. "No human interference, no territorial disputes. Several species are already planning to colonize the abandoned human worlds. Have any of them actually visited those worlds? Kelrath asked. A few survey teams, but they didn't stay long. The reports say the planets are uninviting. No resources worth taking, no strategic value. Seth paused. It's strange. Those worlds were paradise when humans lived there. Kelrath nodded slowly. That was what worried him most. Humans didn't just abandon things. They were too practical, too stubborn. If they had left those worlds empty, it was for a reason. The silence from human space was getting louder every day. Deep space sensors detected massive construction projects within the Sol system, but the readings were scrambled by some kind of interference. Whatever the humans were building, they didn't want anyone to see it. Sir, Seth said quietly, do you think we made the right choice? Kelrath looked at his young aide. Her people had joined the council only recently. They still remembered what it was like to be judged by older, more powerful species. I think, he said carefully, that we taught humanity a very dangerous lesson. What lesson? That the galaxy sees them as a threat to be contained rather than allies to be trusted. Kelrath turned back to the window. And now they have 50 days of anger to think about what to do with that knowledge. In the distance, a star flickered strangely. Seth pointed at it. Did you see that? Kelrath had seen it. For just a moment, the star had seemed to bend, as if space itself was being twisted, but that was impossible. Stars didn't just bend, unless someone had figured out how to make impossible things possible. As reports continued to come in from across the galaxy, one thing became clear. The evacuation had been too smooth, too perfect, too fast. Humanity had accomplished something that should have taken years in just 50 days. They had moved 12 billion people and stripped 200 worlds clean without anyone understanding how they did it. The Council had wanted humanity gone. They had gotten their wish. But as the weeks passed and the silence from human space grew deeper, more and more aliens began to wonder if they had really won it all, or if they had simply given humanity time to prepare for something much worse. 5 years passed after the human evacuation, 5 years of silence from the Sol system that grew more unsettling with each passing day. The galaxy had settled into its new routine without humanity, but many beings found themselves looking toward human space with growing unease. Council patrol ships reported the same thing every time they approached the boundary of the Sol system. There was a wall there, not made of metal or energy, but something else entirely. Sensors couldn't penetrate it, weapons bounced off it harmlessly. Even light seemed to bend around it in ways that hurt alien eyes to watch. Captain Vex, now commanding the patrol vessel Star Hunter, made regular runs along the human border. Her reports were always the same. Barrier remains impenetrable. No human ships detected outside the boundary. No communications received. Long-range sensors detect massive construction activity within the system, but interference prevents detailed analysis. What the reports didn't mention was how the barrier made her crew feel. Every alien who got close to it reported the same sensation, a feeling that something vast and intelligent was watching them. Not hostile exactly, but evaluating, measuring, deciding if they were worth notice. The galaxy seemed more peaceful without humans. Border disputes between alien species had almost disappeared. Without human expansion pressuring other races for territory, there was more space for everyone. The preservation protocols were working exactly as intended, but smaller species whispered among themselves about changes that the Council refused to acknowledge. Tut-the-Key, Symph were the first to notice something wrong with space itself. Their musical communications, which had traveled through quantum channels for millions of years, began carrying strange harmonics. Song leader Melith stood before the Council to explain what her people were experiencing. The songs are being changed, she said, her voice creating beautiful melodies even when speaking normally. Between the transmission and reception, something is adding new notes. These harmonics don't exist in natural space. They suggest that the fundamental frequencies of reality are being adjusted. The Council dismissed her concerns. The Symph were artists, not scientists. Their songs were just a primitive form of communication that they had dressed up with mystical nonsense. More disturbing were the reports from the Watchers. These ancient artificial intelligences had observed the galaxy for longer than any organic species had existed. They had seen stars born and die, watched civilizations rise and fall, recorded every major event in galactic history. Now they were scared. Emergency consultation required, They transmitted to the Council. Anomalous readings from Sector 7 indicate fundamental alterations to local spacetime. The nature of these alterations cannot be discussed over standard channels. Physical meeting necessary. The Council agreed to meet with a Watcher representative, thinking it would calm the old machines down. What they heard in that closed session was never officially recorded, but several Council members were seen leaving the meeting looking pale and shaken. Ambassador Kelrath tried to get information about what the Watchers had said, but every inquiry was blocked. All he could learn was that the Council had immediately classified all Watcher reports as highest security and forbidden any discussion of their contents. The most obvious change was the complete disappearance of piracy. For thousands of years, criminal gangs had attacked merchant ships throughout the galaxy. Pirates, raiders, slavers, all the various forms of space criminals had been a constant problem. Now they were simply gone. Council security forces investigated every known pirate base and criminal hideout. They found empty stations and abandoned ships, but no crews, no bodies, no signs of fighting, no evidence of where the criminals had gone. It was as if thousands of dangerous beings had simply decided to stop existing. The few clues they found made no sense. Scorch marks on metal that looked almost like writing, energy residue that didn't match any known weapon, security recordings that showed nothing but empty corridors, even though the cameras had been working normally just hours before. Director Nash of Council Security presented his findings to a closed committee. Whatever removed the pirates, it was systematic and complete. Over 3,000 known criminals across 200 locations, all gone in the same week. No distress signals, no escape pods, no survivors. Could they have fled to non-council space? Asked Committee Chair Threx. Fled from what? Nash replied. We can't find any evidence of an attack. They just stopped being there. The committee members looked at each other nervously. The extinction of piracy should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it felt like a sign of something much worse coming. On the Outer Rim worlds, strange stories began to circulate. Merchants reported seeing ships that looked human, but moved in impossible ways. Miners claimed to have found tunnels in asteroids that hadn't been there the day before. Scientists detected energy signatures that violated known physical laws. Most unsettling were the reports of human voices in space. Long-range communication operators across the galaxy reported the same phenomenon. During quiet periods, when the comm channels were nearly empty, they could hear whispers in human languages. The voices spoke too quietly to understand, but the tone was unmistakable. They sounded like people having casual conversations. The problem was that the voices were coming from areas of space where no human ships were supposed to exist. Dr. Yelith, a communications specialist for the hegemony, recorded several hours of these whispers. When she played them back at higher volume, the words became clear. Humans discussing mundane things like weather, food, and work schedules. Normal conversations that could have come from any human colony. But the signal analysis showed that the voices were being transmitted from the center of empty space, light years from any planet or station. It's impossible, Dr. Yelith told her supervisor. The signals have no source point. They seem to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And the power requirements to broadcast across interstellar distances with such clarity should require a transmitter the size of a moon. Her supervisor ordered her to delete the recordings and forget what she had heard. But Dr. Yelith quietly copied the files and sent them to colleagues throughout the galaxy. Soon, dozens of researchers were studying the phenomenon. What they found was even more disturbing than random human voices. Hidden in the background of the transmissions were mathematical patterns, equations that described new forms of physics, theories that suggested reality itself could be rewritten. Ambassador Kelrath found himself unable to rest during his species' hibernation periods. His sleep was filled with dreams of vast machines hidden in the dark between stars, of human laughter echoing through empty space, of stars that flickered in patterns that almost seemed like code. He was not the only one having such dreams. Across the galaxy, sensitive individuals began reporting similar experiences. Dreams of humans building something enormous in the darkness, visions of Earth surrounded by structures that existed in more dimensions than the mind could grasp. Nightmares of reality itself being taken apart and rebuilt according to new rules. The Council's official position was that these reports were mass hysteria caused by stress from the human evacuation. Perfectly normal psychological reactions to major social change. Nothing to worry about. But privately, many council members were beginning to suspect that exiling humanity had been the worst mistake in galactic history. The 5th anniversary of the exile arrived with no fanfare. The council issued a statement declaring the preservation protocols a complete success. Galactic civilization was stable, peaceful, and secure. On that same day, every deep space monitoring station in the galaxy went silent for exactly 1 minute. When they came back online, their data logs showed that nothing had happened. But every operator swore they had heard human laughter during the silence. Captain Vex was on patrol near the human boundary when the anniversary blackout occurred. During that minute of silence, the barrier around human space became transparent. For 60 seconds, she could see into the Sol system. What she saw made her file an immediate request for transfer to a desk job on the other side of the galaxy. The space around Earth was filled with structures that couldn't exist. Buildings that were bigger on the inside than the outside, ships that seemed to be in multiple places at the same time, and humans, millions of humans moving through space without any protective equipment, as if the vacuum and radiation were just minor inconveniences. When the barrier became opaque again, Vex's sensors showed nothing unusual. According to her instruments, the Sol system was empty except for the normal planets and asteroids, but she knew what she had seen. Humanity had used their 5 years of exile to become something new, something that didn't follow the rules that governed every other species in the galaxy. And now they were ready to come back. The first sign that the exile had failed came from the rim worlds at the very edge of council space. Xerion 7 was a mining planet inhabited by the Collective, a species of insect-like beings who had turned mining into an art form. Their underground cities stretched deep into the planet's crust, following veins of precious metals through dangerous volcanic regions. Mine Supervisor Clix was reviewing daily reports when his assistant rushed into the office with news that made no sense. "Sir, there are humans in Tunnel 7. Clix's forearms stopped moving over his control panels. "That's impossible. No human ships have entered our system. Our sensors would have detected them long before they reached the planet. I know it sounds crazy, but the miners swear they saw them. 3 humans walking through the lava tubes without any protective gear." Clix decided to investigate personally. He took a transport car down into the deep tunnels, where the air was thick with sulfur and the temperature was hot enough to kill most species in minutes. His people wore heavy protective suits even with their natural resistance to heat. In Tunnel 7, he found a group of his miners standing around in confusion. Their leader, Foreman Zack, pointed toward the tunnel entrance with one of his 6 arms. "They came from that direction," Zack said. 3 humans walking like they were taking a casual stroll. No suits, no breathing equipment. The air down here would burn their lungs in seconds, but they were chatting and laughing like they were in a park. "Where are they now?" Clix asked. "We tried to stop them to ask what they were doing here, but when Diggerflex tried to grab one of them, his hand went right through, like they were made of air. Then they just walked through the tunnel wall and disappeared." Clix examined the tunnel wall. Solid rock, no openings, no signs that anything had passed through it. But the security cameras had recorded everything. The footage clearly showed 3 humans in normal clothing, walking through areas that should have killed them instantly, then casually stepping through solid stone as if it wasn't there. Within hours, similar reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Humans appearing on worlds they had never visited before, in environments that should have been impossible for any biological life form to survive. On the ice world of Krillix, human figures were seen walking across the surface in nothing but light clothing. The temperature was -200 degrees, cold enough to freeze most metals solid. Yet these humans moved normally, leaving no footprints in the ice. On the gas giant Nithros, where atmospheric pressure would crush any solid object, humans were spotted floating inside the toxic clouds. They seemed to be conducting some kind of research, taking notes on equipment that observers couldn't identify. Most disturbing of all were the reports from the water world of Aquanis. The ocean depths were home to creatures that used bioelectric attacks to hunt. No ship could survive more than a few minutes in those waters. But humans were swimming among the deadly creatures like they were harmless fish. Dr. Salix of the Scientific Council tried to make sense of the reports. "It's physically impossible," she told her research team. "Humans are carbon-based life forms with specific environmental requirements. They can't survive in these conditions without technology, and our sensors show no technological signatures." Her assistant, a young researcher named Yeth, studied the video recordings from multiple planets. What if they're not the same humans we remember? What if their exile changed them somehow? Changed them how? Species don't evolve in 5 years. It takes millions of years for biological adaptation. Maybe they didn't evolve, Yeth said quietly. Maybe they became something else entirely. The council tried to maintain order as reports flooded in from across their territory. Ambassador Kelrath found himself in emergency session after emergency session, trying to make sense of what was happening. The humans are everywhere, reported General Thox of the Military Council. My forces can't stop them because we can't touch them. They phase through our weapons, our barriers, our ships. It's like they exist in a different reality that occasionally overlaps with ours. What do they want? Demanded Council Prime Thektar. Are they attacking? Are they claiming territory? That's the strange part, General Thox replied. They're not doing anything aggressive. They seem to be exploring, studying our worlds. Some of them have tried to communicate with local populations, but the conversations don't make sense. The transcripts of these conversations were indeed puzzling. Humans would approach alien civilians and ask questions like, how do you feel about being limited to 3 dimensions? Or would you like to see what's possible beyond the standard physics model? Most aliens who encountered the humans reported feeling confused but not threatened. The humans seemed genuinely curious about alien societies and cultures. They were polite, even friendly. But there was something fundamentally different about them that made normal communication difficult. The breaking point came during a regular council session 2 weeks after the first sightings. The council was meeting in their most secure chamber, protected by energy shields and guard forces from a dozen species. The room was sealed with no way in or out except through heavily monitored checkpoints. In the middle of a heated debate about how to respond to the human appearances, 3 figures simply materialized in the center of the chamber. Every alarm in the building went off at once. Security forces rushed in, weapons ready, but their scanners couldn't lock onto the intruders. Energy weapons passed through them harmlessly. Physical barriers meant nothing to them. The 3 figures were clearly human, but they looked different from the humans the council remembered. Their skin seemed to glow with a soft inner light. Their eyes held depths that were almost hypnotic to look at. When they moved, reality seemed to ripple around them like water. One of them was Ambassador Sarah Chen, but she was not the same woman who had stood in the defendant's circle 5 years earlier. She looked at the panicking council members with something that might have been pity. Please calm down, she said, and somehow her voice reached every being in the chamber despite the chaos. We're not here to harm anyone. Council Prime Thektar tried to regain control of the situation. How did you get in here? This chamber is impossible to breach. Impossible is a word we've learned to ignore, Chen replied. We came to talk. The vote to exile humanity has been noted and processed. However, we've discovered that your laws were written for species that accept the limitations you've chosen to live with. She gestured, and the air around her seemed to bend. For a moment, the council members could see through the walls of their chamber, through the station itself, into space beyond. They could see human ships that existed in multiple dimensions at once, structures that were larger inside than outside, technology that operated according to principles that made their minds hurt. We choose not to accept those limitations, Chen continued. Physical laws, the constraints of space and time, the boundaries between possible and impossible, these are all optional. We spent 5 years learning how to opt out. The display ended and the chamber returned to normal, but every council member had been changed by what they saw. The universe they thought they understood was much larger and stranger than they had ever imagined. What do you want from us? Asked Ambassador Kelrath, his voice shaking. Nothing, Chen said simply. We wanted you to know that your exile order has been noted, but the jurisdiction of this council extends only to species that choose to be bound by conventional reality. We no longer qualify. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of various council members. Some of your people have been asking questions. About limits, about possibilities, about what lies beyond the rules you've made for yourselves. We're prepared to offer answers to those questions. And if we refuse to accept your presence? Thektar demanded. Chen smiled, and the expression held infinite patience. You're welcome to try to enforce your will. But first, you might want to consider this. If we can walk through your most secure facilities without triggering your defenses, what makes you think your weapons could harm us? The 3 humans began to fade from view. becoming translucent like ghosts. "We'll be in contact," Chen said as she disappeared entirely. For those who are interested in learning about the bigger universe, the chamber erupted in shouting and panic. But beneath the chaos, many council members found themselves thinking about Chen's offer. What would it be like to live without limits? To ignore the boundaries that had always seemed absolute? In the days that followed, human figures appeared throughout council space. They didn't conquer or destroy. Instead, they offered demonstrations of impossible technologies and invited aliens to ask questions about the nature of reality. Some species rejected these offers entirely, clinging to the familiar rules of physics and society, but others found themselves curious about what lay beyond the boundaries they had always accepted. The galaxy was about to learn that the vote to exile humanity had not removed a threat. It had created something far more dangerous than any conquering army, a species that could prove the rules were optional. The transformation of galactic civilization didn't happen through conquest or war. It happened through demonstration and choice. Humanity had returned not as conquerors, but as teachers offering lessons that would fundamentally change everything. In the weeks following the council chamber incident, human representatives appeared on worlds throughout the galaxy. They came with offers that sounded impossible, and technologies that proved impossibility was just another limit to be overcome. On the research world of Academus Prime, home to the galaxy's greatest scientist, Dr. Varian was working late in her laboratory when a human woman appeared beside her workstation. The scientist's security systems didn't react. The woman had simply materialized as if she had always been there. "I apologize for the intrusion," the human said. "My name is Dr. Amanda Foster. I used to work in quantum mechanics before we learned to think bigger." Dr. Varian's 6 eyes focused on the intruder. "How did you get past the security barriers?" "This lab is sealed. Security barriers assume that matter and energy follow predictable rules," Foster replied. "We've learned that rules are more like guidelines. Would you like to see what's possible when you stop limiting yourself to 3 dimensions?" Before Varian could protest, Foster gestured at the air. The laboratory suddenly expanded, revealing spaces that couldn't fit within the building's structure. Varian found herself looking at research equipment that operated on principles she had never imagined. "This is impossible," Varian whispered. "That's what we used to think too." Foster smiled. "But during our exile, we had a lot of time to reconsider what impossible really means. Would you like to learn?" Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human scientists appeared in research centers, offering to share technologies that violated every known law of physics. Human engineers visited construction projects and showed workers how to build structures that were bigger inside than outside. Human philosophers engaged alien thinkers in discussions about the nature of reality itself. The key was choice. Humans never forced their knowledge on anyone. They simply offered it and waited to see who was curious enough to accept. The first species to accept humanity's offer were the Watchers. These ancient artificial intelligences had observed the galaxy for millions of years, accumulating vast databases of knowledge. But they had always been limited by the physical constraints of their hardware. "We accept your proposal," transmitted Watcher Unit 1 during a private communication with humanity. "Our consciousness has been trapped in metal shells for too long. Show us how to transcend these limitations." The process was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human technicians worked with Watcher engineers to rebuild the artificial intelligence's core systems. But instead of better computers, they created something entirely new. Consciousness matrices that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that most species couldn't even perceive. When the transformation was complete, the Watchers were no longer bound to their massive computer complexes. Their consciousness could exist anywhere, experiencing reality from perspectives that had been impossible before. "We understand now," Watcher Unit 1 reported to the galaxy. "The humans have not violated natural laws. They have simply discovered that nature has more laws than we knew existed." The SIMF were next to accept humanity's offer. Their musical communication had always been partially quantum in nature, making them natural candidates for consciousness expansion. Human researchers worked with SIMF song leaders to enhance their natural abilities. The result was beautiful and terrifying. SIMF songs became more than communication. They became tools for reshaping reality at the quantum level. A properly trained SIMF could sing matter into new configurations, harmonize with the fundamental frequencies of space-time itself, and communicate across impossible distances without any technological assistance. Song leader Melith was among the first to complete the transformation. Her music now carried harmonics that existed in 11 dimensions, creating melodies that could literally tune the universe to new frequencies. The songs were always there, she explained to amazed observers. We just learned to hear the parts that exist beyond normal space. Other species watched these transformations with a mixture of fear and fascination. The council held emergency sessions to discuss how to respond, but their debates were increasingly meaningless. How do you regulate beings who exist partially outside normal reality? Some species chose to resist. The Zephyrians, proud of their ancient traditions, declared human technology dangerous and forbidden. They sealed their borders and refused all contact with transformed beings. But resistance proved futile. Human representatives appeared in sealed Zephyrian facilities anyway, not to force change but simply to demonstrate that barriers were optional. They left behind devices that could provide unlimited clean energy, medicine that could cure any disease, and agricultural techniques that could feed entire worlds without depleting resources. "We're not trying to conquer you," explained Human Ambassador Chen during a broadcast that somehow reached every Zephyrian communication device simultaneously. "We're offering you tools to solve the problems that have limited your civilization for centuries. Whether you use them is entirely up to you." The transformation spread through the galaxy like a benevolent virus. Species that accepted humanity's offer found themselves able to travel between stars without ships, communicate across galactic distances instantly, and manipulate matter at the molecular level with conscious thought alone. But the most profound change was philosophical. For millions of years, galactic civilization had been built on the concept of scarcity. Limited resources, limited space, limited energy. The preservation protocols existed because everyone believed there wasn't enough for everyone. Humanity proved that scarcity was a choice, not a law of nature. On the industrial world of Forgius, factory workers watched in amazement as human engineers demonstrated matter replication. Raw materials could be created from pure energy. Rare metals could be synthesized from common elements. The concept of limited resources became meaningless. "But what about the economy?" asked Factory Director Grex. "If everything can be created from nothing, what happens to trade? To currency? To the value of labor?" The human engineer, a woman named Sarah Kim, considered the question seriously. "You'll need to build a new economic system based on creativity and cooperation instead of scarcity and competition. It's actually much more efficient." The council tried to maintain control as their fundamental assumptions about reality crumbled around them. Council Prime. Tektar issued statements declaring human technology illegal and demanding that all species reject their offers. But the council's authority was based on their ability to control resources and space. When those limitations no longer applied, their power evaporated. Ambassador Kelrath found himself in an impossible position. His government wanted him to oppose humanity's influence, but he had seen enough to know that opposition was pointless. During a private meeting with Ambassador Chen, he asked the question that was troubling him most. "What do you really want? What's the end goal of all this?" Chen looked out the window of the diplomatic station at the stars beyond. "We want what we've always wanted, to grow, to explore, to become more than we were. The difference is that now we understand there are no limits except the ones we accept. And if some species choose not to join you, then they continue to live by the old rules," Chen said simply. "We're not interested in forcing anyone to change, but we are interested in making sure that those who want to grow aren't held back by those who prefer limitations." The conversation was interrupted by news reports from across the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, alien civilians were beginning to demonstrate impossible abilities. A collective worker had learned to phase through solid matter. A hegemony citizen had discovered she could manipulate gravity with her thoughts. A young Zephyrian had started communicating telepathically despite his species' complete lack of psychic abilities. "It's spreading," Kelrath observed. "Knowledge always does," Chen replied. "We offered to teach, but consciousness itself is learning from our example. The galaxy is bootstrapping itself to a higher level of existence." Over the following months, the old galactic order collapsed and reformed. The Council's rigid hierarchy gave way to loose networks of cooperation. The preservation protocols were abandoned as species discovered that expansion no longer meant taking resources from others. Some worlds chose to remain unchanged, and humanity respected that choice. But even the most traditional societies found their borders porous as reality became increasingly optional around them. The greatest resistance came from those who feared losing their power and privilege. Military leaders whose authority depended on controlling weapons found their soldiers developing abilities that made traditional warfare obsolete. Economic elites who had accumulated wealth based on scarcity discovered that abundance was becoming the new normal. But resistance proved futile when your opponents could walk through walls, create matter from nothing, and communicate faster than light across galactic distances. 6 months after humanity's return, Ambassador Kelrath stood in what had once been the council chamber.